Hey, you fucking Ruds. I'm your imaginary friend that's gonna be following you throughout your trip. Buckle up and enjoy the ride, losers.
In the summer of 1982, the world seemed as if it was on fire as the Cold War raged on. The Soviet Union was involved in a protracted war in Afghanistan, while Argentina and Great Britain battled it out in the South Atlantic over the Falkland Islands.
Israel and the PLO fought vicious battles in Lebanon, while 700,000 people gathered in New York Central Park to protest the proliferation of nuclear weapons.
Mother Earth will swallow you. Lay your body.
But in the small town of Oceanside, New York, situated on the beautiful South Shore of Long Island, the world was much less complicated. In June of that year, more than 700 students would graduate from Oceanside Senior High School. Most would go their own way, but for a small group, this was not the end. It was the beginning. Early in the morning, on a late summer day in August of 1982, 3 of these Oceanside High School graduates, Russ Silver, Gary Stark, and David Silverman, would each separately begin a journey 200 miles to the north, to the small town of Oneonta, New York, home to 15,000 people and 2 colleges. SUNY Oneonta was their destination. Russ Silver, best known for his hard-driving, tire-screeching, turbocharged Chevy Camaro. Gary Stark, president of the Oceanside High School Corrugated Packaging Materials Club. He worked his way through high school and college at the world-famous Party City, always surrounding himself in paper products. For David Silverman, high school was a distraction to his true passion of doing nothing. However, by the 11th grade, he began to show some promise, where he began to rise to the ranks of Taco Bell, where he would eventually become a senior executive within the Oceanside branch. This yearbook photo is the only surviving evidence that David Silverman actually existed at Oceanside Senior High School. Within minutes of arriving at Blodgett Hall, they would form friendships. Some would last mere hours, others would last a lifetime. Russ Silver describes his first meeting of Rich Heller.
Brought me up, and I was just, let's say, very nervous about going there. And they brought me into the dorm, and the first guy I meet is this very large individual with a rock and roll t-shirt, may have been like Led Zeppelin or Ozzy Osbourne or something, and he puts his arm around me when my parents were going back out to the car to get stuff, and he says, "Don't worry, as soon as our parents get out of here, I got a bottle of Jack Daniels, we're going to tear this place apart." That was my first introduction to Rich the Fonz Heller.
Rich Heller describes his first meeting
of Russ and
Yeah, I
Gary.
was probably the first one there. I know I was in a triple, so I wanted to weasel the best bed. So I was the first one there. So I was all unpacked and everything, and then my roommate came. The first one was Rich Boswick, and at that point I was sick to my stomach. So I was just hanging out in the main room there with my parents, and then I think Russ came in first, and then Gary came in a little bit later. And I think I remember the first thing I said to Russ and Gary as soon as my parents left was I called them into the room and showed them that I brought up a couple bottles of alcohol, and I said, "We're going to have fun tonight."
Robert Tovmassian, who had been smuggled out of the Soviet Union several years earlier, was a world-class soccer player. Russell Silver describes his first meeting of Robert Tovmassian, who would later be known simply
Rooming with
as
Raul for
Raul.
probably about a month before we got 2 words out of him. All we used to see was the back of his jacket, Forest Hill Soccer, leaving our suite and going to practice or wherever else he was going. We were all hanging out, and the suite was all getting pretty close, and Raul was a mystery. The best part is we only knew his name started with an R. And since he was a soccer player from Queens, we just somehow assumed his name was Raul. And the name Raul actually has stuck 30 years later. We're all still calling him Raul. But it took about a month before he actually started to talk to us. And then we met him and his Chinese throwing stars and nunchucks and all the other good stuff that came with Raul. And here we are 30-something years later, and we're all still friends.
Rich recalls the first night out on the town.
And then everybody started meandering in, and then I think we went out that night to a bar called The Depot, where we were doing derailments. And that was the first time I think I saw Russ and Gary both vomit.
Wasn't that the night Russ was keeping track of how many drinks he had?
Yes, Russ was keeping his beer caps in his pocket, and when we got back, and he pulled out his handful, I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, he was counting his beer cap.
Living down the hall from Russ, Gary, and Rich was a suite full of upperclassmen, the founding fathers of Rud's. The suite contained numerous legendary alumni, but it was the man with the Tom Selleck mustache that stood out, Richard Rodriguez, otherwise simply known as Wolfie.
It was the second day I was just wandering the hallway, and I started to wander down to the other end of the hallway and the complete other side of the building, mainly because I saw smoke coming out from under the door. And at first I thought there was a fire or something in there. So I knock on the door just to see what's going on, and that was my first introduction to Wolfie and his gang of Ruds.
Amongst all of the craziness, this one guy stood out. He was in this white flowing toga, and he had this big mustache, kind of like a Tom Selleck look to him, with 2 beers in each hand, and here he was, kind of the king of the entire party. And I remember leaning over to someone, and I said, "Who is that guy?" And the person responded, "That is Wolfie."
But everything was not perfect. There was a bit of tension between these 2 rival groups.
Yeah, because they were there a year before us, and evidently they were the kingpins. And
They had a problem with a bunch of freshmen
exactly.
taking over.
And we came in there, and I think they felt a little insecure because we had a new sheriff in town. We were taking control of the pit at that point. But that rivalry forged a long-lasting friendship, and a lot of good times and a lot of fun times.
Absolutely.
Both freshman year and pretty much throughout to modern day.
It was through the growing friendship with Wolfie that the group was introduced to Paul Goldhirsch. Paul was different from the other Ruds. He was responsible. He was serious. He exhibited a certain air of maturity. He was an adult. Years later, it was determined to be merely an illusion, similar to the Stewfish principle, where a 5 stands in between 2 1s and becomes an 8.
Oh my God.
The following year, the group would expand. Bruce Goodhart, a fellow Oceanside High School alum, transferred from Nassau Community College.
Bruce was a major addition, bringing his hard partying, fun-loving, food-chumming ways with him. Adrian Gonzalez from neighboring Island Park would also transfer from Nassau Community College. Adrian was also a huge addition who brought a certain self-styled sophistication, often found hard at work, studying in the library or Schumacher Hall. He was always impeccably dressed. He was both a scholar and a gentleman. As the years flew by, they were filled with great memories.
Rejoice, rejoice, we have no choice but to carry on. The fortunes of fables are able. Now witness the quickness with which we...
Within 4 years, they had all graduated, filled with incredible memories, but equipped with virtually no skills that would be useful in the workforce. Yet somehow, they each found their own way. Some would go on to get advanced degrees, they would all find jobs, they would marry, they would buy homes, and they would have children.
Carry on, love is coming, love is coming to us all.
In the blink of an eye, they had turned 50 years old and were staring at their own mortality.
Will you bring me happiness? Will you bring me sorrow?
In a desperate attempt to remain youthful, David had taken a trip to Colorado for his 50th birthday. He brought back tales of mountain biking, hiking, baseball games at Coors Field, and the best damn key lime pie he had ever tasted. 2 years later, as he was passing through on a cross-country trip with his son Ben, he connected with Adrian, who was now living in Denver. The seeds of the Rud Trip had been planted. Sharing their exploits with the group back in New York, the Ruds were eager to go. That August, Raoul visited the Ruds in New York, and that Christmas, Adrian came to New York for a visit, and the talk of a Colorado trip began to intensify. But it was not until a video produced over the Memorial Day weekend that provided a glimpse into the future. Similar to It's a Wonderful Life, providing a look at what could be, did the planning begin to take place in earnest.
There'll be plenty of eating.
Open up the champagne.
There'll be plenty of drinking.
Well, you got a real funny way to show it.
Oh man,
Who says look at this fine nonsense freaking bandit?
And there will be plenty of boosting.
Holy shit.
Here, show him the caps.
look at the
And then there'll be plenty of party.
Welcome to my house.
Joining the Ruds on the trip would be fellow Oceanside High School alum and star athlete Carlton St. Bernard, better known as Butch, as well as Mark Sacker, also an alum of Oceanside High School, as well as Oceanside Jewish Center. In an interesting twist of fate, in the production of this documentary, it was noted that Russ's yearbook entry had been plagiarized from Butch's. Former Oceanside High School alum Jeff Silversnow was also invited to attend, but due to a prior commitment was unable to join the group. Tragedy struck the Stark family just days before the trip began, as his father was involved in a near-fatal accident and his mother's health took a very serious turn for the worse. In a serious blow to the trip, Gary, needing to spend time with his family, was unable to join. Under dubious circumstances, Paul Goldhirsch did not join his fellow Ruds for the trip. While there were some sightings that indicated he might have been having an affair, the true story behind Paul's mysterious disappearance remains unknown to this day. The trip's roster had been set. Russ, David, Mark, Bruce, Rich, Raul, Butch, and the surprise mystery guest, Wolfie. Before sunrise on the morning of July 29th, Wolfie, who had arrived the prior evening, and David set out from Dix Hills. Just as the sun was making first light, they picked up Russ. They next picked up Mark and headed to JFK Airport, where they boarded their flight to Denver at 8:30 a.m. They landed at Denver International Airport around noon, where they met Raul before heading to Adrian's home in the hippest section of Denver, after making a quick stop at the House of Dankness.
Nice job. Good move. That's freaking awesome. How do you do it with a credit card too? You really want to get fancy. And it's a perfectly clean cut.
After a celebratory toast, Adrian served a delicious lunch, and after a quick rest, they were ready for a big night out on the town. After visiting some of the hottest bars and restaurants in Adrian's neighborhood, they turned in to get a good night's sleep as they were heading into the mountains early the following morning.
The last time Wolfie was on a bicycle, it had training wheels on it. And Mark, it was a big wheel.
They arrived in Vail, Colorado by late morning. They got their gear and their bikes, and they headed to the top of the mountain. There they assembled for some pictures before they began their epic bike journey.
Here comes the world famous Rud Trip.
They started out slowly as their 53-year-old bodies were trying to figure out what their heads were making them do.
Come on, boys.
Initially, they needed to take frequent rests. Their muscles ached with every turn of the pedal. But after a while, their bodies loosened up, and they decided to let it fly.
Bicycle, bicycle, bicycle.
I want to ride my
bicycle, bicycle, bicycle.
I want to ride my bicycle. I want to ride my bike. I want to ride my bicycle. I want to ride it where I like.
You say black,
I say white.
you say bar,
I say bite.
you say shark.
I say him and Jaws was never my scene, and I don't like Star Wars.
You say
I
Rose,
say Royce.
you say God,
Give me a choice.
say Lord.
I say Christ. I don't believe in Peter Pan, Frankenstein, or Superman.
All I wanna do is bicycle, bicycle, bicycle.
I want to ride.
As they got closer to the bottom of the mountain, they loosened up even further. They decided to give the people in the bottom of Vale Village a little bit of a show. After burning up the single track, the boys signed a few autographs and posed for a few pictures for their fans, and then headed to Breckenridge. The day had clearly taken its toll, but when the rest of the Rud group had finally arrived, Rich, Bruce, and Butch, things started to pick up once again.
You look good too. How was the biking? I heard you took a spill.
That was minor. Yeah, no injuries, no injuries. Not like the guy. That's our liquor. You want to get a cruise?
That Butch?
Bruce doesn't want to go up and down the steps.
I have to get acclimated.
Are we gonna eat first?
This is gonna be a mystery guest.
What are you doing? Are you making video footage of this?
You're not taking
I'm hair gelling. You're hair gelling. What are you doing here?
Sign of the last minute.
Awesome.
From their home base in Breckenridge, the boys started to venture out. They started the night out at the world-famous Breckenridge Brewery.
I want some real food, though. I don't want to just have donuts.
It was at the Breckenridge Brewery where the first of one of many of Bruce's flaps would occur.
What do you think I'm doing here?
Why don't you listen? You know,
What are we playing Risk?
Bruce, you texted that you're going to get it. You're sure you want some dispensaries.
The House of Dagness.
Do you want a t-shirt from Sweet Leaf? Would you prefer that? Psychedelic too. Tiger.
Following morning, they got up early to head southwest to the town of Buena Vista to begin their rafting journey on the headwaters of the Arkansas River, where they would face Category 4 and Category 5 rapids. They went over safety instructions and prepared to launch their boats. The level of flapping from our guide had us all wondering whether he had taken some gummies earlier that morning.
Kind of a ebb and a flow of this thing. It slows down, speeds up. It's an emotional roller coaster. But when we get to the big stuff, we'll have to be concentrated. But there will be time for you guys in between a couple of these to just let this just for a minute. So you look downstream, it stays real busy here. Pretty exciting section of river, I would have to say. Let's go forward! Come on, boys. I saw that. Get forward! Down. Okay, get ready to back pedal. Okay, back pedal. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Keep going, keep going, keep going.
But he's broke, he's so stagnant, he knows when he goes back to this mobile home, that's when it's back to the lab again, yo. This old rhapsody better go capture this moment and hope it don't. You better lose yourself in the music, the moment you own it, you better never let it go. You only get one shot, do not miss your chance to blow. This opportunity comes once in a lifetime. You better lose yourself in the music, the moment you own it, you better never let it go. You only get one shot, do not miss your chance to blow. This opportunity comes once in a lifetime. You better so just scamping through this whole.
Category 4 rapid, the group even had time to pose for a picture. Mark even had time for a smile.
It only grows harder, homie grows hotter. He blows, it's all over. These hoes is all on him. Coast to coast shows, he's known as the globe trotter. Lonely roads, God only knows he's grown farther. From home, he's no father. He goes home and barely knows his own daughter. But hold your nose, cause here goes the cold water.
Our momentum down. Probably using a back pedal, right? As we drop the drop, we're gonna be facing it like this, pointing towards the left shore. So you three on the right cannot bail out. You have to paddle. Okay, let's go forward. Again, you three on the right, you have to stay strong. Okay, it's gonna look intimidating, so you paddle. That'll help everybody out in the long run. Okay, you three on the right, do not bail out. Stand strong. Let's go
The instructions had been set. The boys were about to enter a Category 5 stretch of the river that was very treacherous. The instructions were clear. The 3 paddlers on the right, Bruce in front, Mark in the middle, David in the back. They could not bail. They needed to continue paddling.
Go! Bruce! Paddle! Stop!
This man, he's goddamn food stamps, don't buy diapers. And there's no movie, there's no Mackay Pfeiffer. This is my life, and these times are so hard. And it's getting even harder trying to feed and water my seed. Plus, see this order caught up between me.
Bruce! Beautiful! Bruce! What happened?
The damn monotony's gotten me to the point I'm like a snail. I've got to formulate a plot or end up in jail or shot. Success is my only motherfucking option. Failure's not. Mama love you, but this trail has got to go. I cannot.
I don't know how many times we talked about not freezing up.
While the question was most likely rhetorical, the videotape reveals that we had talked about it exactly 3 times.
You did one shot. Do not miss your chance to blow.
God is my witness. Did you paddle?
The GoPro was the witness. I didn't see it, but we'll have to go back to the tape to see.
The evidence from the GoPro turned out to be inconclusive. It could not be determined whether Bruce had frozen or whether he had continued to paddle.
And when you're not paddling, remember that could be costly because if we don't all paddle, remember what I said, these 3 are paddling, plus myself, that's going to drive us right into the rock. Well, we made it. We made it. I can see you going, oh shit. That was a tough drop, man. And I tried to warn you. Tried to tell you.
You succeeded, buddy. We listened to you.
Well, most of us. Bruce, you just tried my last little ounce of courage here to see how much I got. Woo!
It was here that Bruce revealed from his perspective what actually had happened.
Gentlemen, the numbers! We did it! Woo! Okay, back pedal. Well, did everybody have a little fun out there? Yeah. Bruce shit his pants like he promised, which is good. That wetsuit can go home with you. There's the bag.
After one last crack at Bruce, the boys wrapped up the river trip and headed back to Breckenridge to pick up Rich Heller, who had eaten breakfast, late breakfast, brunch, and lunch before we picked him up and headed out to lunch. After lunch, we headed back to Denver. Once back in Denver, it was time to experience the nightlife once again. On an interesting side note, the boys were so oblivious they did not even realize that they were in the middle of a bachelorette viewing party and that they were the only men in an entire bar filled with women. Based on Adrian's pronunciation of Osterio Marto, that is where the boys decided to head to.
There's a place called Osteria Marco, which is right on Larimer Street. It's Osteria Marco, Osteria Marco, Osteria Marco, Osteria Marco. Cheese platters and shit like that.
Well, where would you recommend?
Once again, Bruce was caught flat. Perhaps his finest flap of the trip.
I said, when you're making a mule, and you put it in that copper mug, the copper mug creates a chemical reaction with the alcohol to change the taste.
It imparts a unique chemist.
Yes. And Adrian agreed with me.
I agree. It imparts the taste, a different taste. It's got a plastic cup.
I don't think he agrees that it's a chemical reaction.
Well, what else would it be? Colder. It definitely, you know what? It may be just, that it keeps it a lot colder, because this cup is ice cold. You put your arms around it and it's cold.
You got a better... As
soon as I saw The Bachelor on the big screen, I knew Adrian had his place.
You guys are the lamest guys I've ever freaking cooked from.
Says the guys who were late by an hour.
Look at this place.
It was here, knowing that the middle seat had no cushion, that David executed the perfect seat weasel for Rich.
Butch, come on in.
After arriving an hour earlier, the boys had finally realized that they were the only men in the bar.
I'm like looking around. Remember I said it's weird. Like there should be this thing. Is it The Bachelor? We said it was something
Chemical
else.
reactions of Moscow Mule began to intensify. So
back
did
in there when
Bruce's
they went to
flap.
go get their room. They went to get the room and we thought Dave was going to have a freak out because there was only 2 reservations. And we said if Hella takes that big room and he takes that big bed, it's not fair. So what was his punishment going to be? No. Do you know? What did I say?
I don't remember. Why are you blabbing about it anyway?
Of course. There was a reason. I just don't know it now.
Just can't remember right now.
Boys had an awesome time watching The Bachelor at the View House, and then headed off to Osteria Marte, where they had an even better time listening to the flap.
You want to drive? You want
Over dinner, Bruce engrosses his audience as he talks about a moth and a butterfly, or was it a rat and a mouse, or I'm not even sure what the hell it was.
You could tailgate out of the back. Tailgate out of the back.
But then he said that
Also the
music,
the Jeep,
Very circular logic. Very circular.
But the SUV, you could like almost.
This is unbelievable. I heard it like 20 minutes ago. He's still talking about that? The dummy must have. You can't.
Boys soon turned the conversation around from butterflies to Diana Ross and Donna Summers.
Somebody would have to.
That's for Diana Ross.
By Donna Summer.
It's not a forum.
He shut us all.
flip around.
Hold on, let me just make sure.
No, that's Diana Ross.
The conversation ultimately came back to the
in the
raft.
face of like crazy waves. It seems
You gotta keep paddling.
we gotta paddle.
That's why
through
they
them.
specifically said, I want the most experienced people in the front of
So
the boat.
when the wave hits you in the face,
That should
As the night wore on, they left the swanky Osteria Marte to go to a grungy rock bar. It was here that the boys encountered an unexplained phenomenon.
There's good rockin' tonight.
After recovering from the hard night of drinking the night before, they decided to go for a hiking excursion in Red Rocks Canyon.
Look at all these losers coming up the hill.
That was it, Rich. You made it.
Unknown to them at the time, the consequences of the hike were almost fatal.
20 steps.
All right, that was good.
Yeah, that was good. Where's the car?
This looks like our guide.
Russ took his turn at flapping. But not to be outdone, Bruce returned to perhaps his finest form of flapping during the entire trip.
He's gonna go for a run. I'll leave you guys here in the hot sun.
Show me the way. I want you. Show me the way.
And I'm sure you packed up some cookies too.
I didn't pack them up. They packed them up.
You're living on your nerves.
You should post this on the GoPro website. Because people post cool videos. You should post Bruce telling a story about him saving $10 a day. Because that's much more exciting than this. You didn't even get to dinner yet. That's much more exciting than this 30-minute video. This will be in the GoPro Hall of Fame.
Someone thought of healing. And all I really want to know. Oh, won't you?
Everything else aside, you can make your $40 from running this alone.
Exactly. That's my point.
Still talking.
Show me the way. I want you. Day after day.
Despite all of the flapping, the boys were still able to take in the scenic beauty. A little past the halfway point, the first signs of the impending disaster began to emerge.
Who's in the back? Who's the last man?
Of course. Good,
Shortly after texting his son Jason to pick him up in an ambulance, Rich appeared to suffer from a brief seizure.
We're protecting the trail from all pirates.
As Rich Heller appeared to go into a full cardiac arrest, Bruce Goodhart, a licensed physical therapist, began to administer medical procedures. As the situation deteriorated, Rich Heller said his final goodbyes to his friends. It was here that the party split into two, with David, Russ, Butch, and Raoul running ahead in search of medical assistance. Luckily, the advanced search party found help within minutes, and this footage of the dramatic rescue of Rich Heller from Red Rocks Canyon can be seen in remarkable detail. With promises of free snacks and happy hour at the Marriott Residence Inn, Rich Heller was back on his feet in no time. After draining all they could at the happy hour, the boys' next stop was to Coors Field to see their beloved Mets take on the Colorado Rockies. After the game, they went to one last bar so that Wolfie can enjoy some fine, micro-brewed Mexican craft beer. They went back to their hotel and enjoyed each other's company one last time until late in the evening.
Say I'm doing you wrong, doing you wrong. Well, don't you worry, baby, don't
What breakfast?
The Adrian breakfast.
Yeah, the Asian breakfast.
You can tell Adrian to come here.
What, to make a waffle and go to work?
Maybe he could meet you at the airport for a delicious egg sandwich.
Adrian's.
That'd be better.
He's driving to the airport. Hey, Adrian, by the way, since you're here, can you drop us off the airport?
It's on your way.
It's on your way. He works in his house.
Just follow Butch in the car. He'll take you there.
It's on your way to work.
Just stay behind Butch on the way to the airport.
As the night turned into morning, they made it to breakfast with Adrian, and then said their goodbyes, and began their long journey home.
Once I was 7 years old, my mama told me, go make yourself some friends or you'll be lonely. Once I was 7 years old. It was a big, big world, but we thought we were bigger, pushing each other to the limits. We were learning quicker. By 11, smoking herb and drinking burning liquor. Never rich, so we were out to make that steady figure. Once I was 11 years old, my daddy told me, go get yourself a wife or you'll be lonely. Once I was 11 years old. Always had that dream like my daddy before me. So I started writing songs, I started writing stories. Something about that glory just always seemed to bore me, cause only those I really love will ever really know me. Once I was 20 years old, my story got told before the morning sun when life was lonely. Once I was 20 years old. Only see my goals, I don't believe in failure, cause I know the smallest voices, they can make it major. I got my boys with me, at least those in favor. And if we don't meet before I leave, I hope I'll see you later. Once I was 20 years old, my story got told. I was writing about everything I saw before me. Once I was 20 years old. Soon we'll be 30 years old. Our songs have been sold. We've traveled around the world and we're still roaming. Soon we'll be 30 years old. I'm still learning about life. My woman brought children for me, so I can sing them all my songs and I can tell them stories. Most of my boys are with me, some are still out seeking glory, and some I had to leave behind. My brother, I'm still sorry. Soon I'll be 60 years old. My daddy got 61. Remember life and then your life becomes a better one. I made a man so happy when I wrote a letter once. I hope my children come and visit once or twice a month. Soon I'll be 60 years old. Will I think the world is cold, or will I have a lot of children who can bore me? Soon I'll be 60 years old. Soon I'll be 60 years old. Will I think the world is cold, or will I have a lot of children who can bore me? Soon I'll be 60 years old. Once I was 7 years old, my mama told me, go make yourself some friends or you'll be lonely. Once I was 7 years old. Once I was 7 years old.